Okay, everybody says focus on the customer. We say this over and over again. But the great PMs I have worked with stalk the customer, almost to the point of the police and saying that everything you do, I want to watch you.
I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Govind. And so Govind leads the product management teams focused on the demand side of the business at Turo. He's seen Turo grow more than 10x in revenue and almost 3x as a team. Govind has 10 years of experience in product management in diverse areas such as travel, healthcare, and education, including a stint as the co-founder of a funded education startup. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Govind, and he's going to talk about the role of experimentation, creativity, and judgment in generating business value. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you again, Javed. Glad to be here, and glad you all could make it. Thank you for coming out. So I have a lot to cover, and I know I only have about 30 minutes, so let me also set that up. I'll start with talking a little bit about myself and Turo. I started early, not in product management, but in funky hairstyles. That was actually my parents' gift to me. I grew up in a small town in India, but it was a very cosmopolitan town. Almost 100% of the town had a college degree, and so that really influenced some of my thinking early. A question that I hear often is, how did you get into product? I went to college in Chicago at Illinois Tech, and I was mostly just interested in my girlfriend at the time, my wife now. So I got a very high ROI from college. I then moved to AT&T and focused a lot on a mix of data analysis, but also engineering. And I realized very quickly I like the data analysis piece more than I like the engineering piece. After AT&T, I was really bored, and I wanted to do something in a faster-paced environment, and so I started my own company, the one Javed referenced in education. And I did that for a number of years. We raised money and learned a lot of hard lessons about growth and monetization, and how a lot of people come and it's free, but not a lot of people come and it's paid. And I learned a lot about that. But I think that was a time when I got to understand you need to be really bold to have an impact. Incremental changes don't really move the needle. So, I mean, they do sometimes, but if you really want to have step change impact, you've got to be bold and take some risk. And then I did a few things after that, but I think Turo has been sort of the highlight where I really fell in love with product management. When I joined, it was a small company. Now it's sort of a mid-sized company, and just that journey of retaining that culture, and I know Anjali is going to be speaking about product cultures, and just seeing how that culture develops has been really rewarding. This is where I really fell in love with product. All right, a little bit about Turo. So our mission is to put the world's 1.2 billion plus cars to better use. Really how we do that is we're a two-sided marketplace for car sharing. And so you have hosts who are giving their cars to either make monthly payments for their cars, or just are putting cars on the platform as a business. And so these people can then their cars can then get booked by other folks, people who are looking to go on trips, from San Francisco to Tahoe, or people going to New York for a trip and then needing a car there. So we compete with the likes of Enterprise and so on, but they're a asset-heavy business. We're more like the Airbnb for cars. And so as Javed mentioned, I lead our demand-side teams at Turo. You can sort of envision that there's some standard demand-side stuff that we have to manage. Everything from organic visits, converting those visits, driving a great experience throughout the process, and driving repeats is all sort of stuff that the teams that I work with manage. But we also have some profitability metrics, and today actually we're going to talk a little bit about profitability more than the demand side, because you'll find a lot of information about generating demand and not so much about how to think about the bottom line in terms of your margins. And so some of the things that are very specific to Turo as a marketplace are things like the cost of insurance. So you can imagine when a host gives their car to the platform, one of the big things is, what if an accident happens? And the answer is Turo steps in, right? So essentially, the host's car is always covered, and for us to, but what if the guest doesn't pay us? So if the guest doesn't pay us, we're left holding the bag, and that is called the cost of insurance. And we'll dig deeper, and there's a lot of information to cover, so we'll get into that. But another thing is also things like ops costs. So as team scales, you add more customer support agents, you add claims agents, and you add trust and safety verification to combat fraud and account takeovers and all that. There's a whole world of craziness out there, but those add to your costs as well. And today we're going to focus on cost of insurance. All right, so let's say you've been tasked with cost of insurance, and this is really, a lot of this is going to be our journey figuring out cost of insurance. So till about a year and a half ago, we were very growth focused, right? We're still very growth focused, but one of the things was, all right, how are we doing on our unit economics? And we're like, we got some room for improvement here, right? Just like many startups in the valley. And we're like, yeah, we can do better. So I say day one, but day one for me as a new PM coming in and working on something that I really hadn't worked on was very interesting. And how do you navigate that? You've got this very esoteric, metric to own now, and then what do you do? And I think one thing to do is what any new PM on any new job should do. And this is taken from Chris Jones, who writes in the Silicon Valley Product Group, which is, by the way, a great blog, and highly recommend that. But he says when a new PM joins, they should have two primary goals. One, they should try to become the most knowledgeable person about that metric in the company. And the second thing is you should have at least one big visible win in the first 90 days. And those intuitively make sense, right? So you ultimately are the owner of the metric. You should be the one who knows every little nook and cranny and every nuance of that metric. And of course, that doesn't just mean you, it means the team. But there's a few people who know a lot about that metric. And the publicly visible win is important because that generates confidence. Like as a company, when there's an immature metric that you're working on, you want to generate trust and confidence and credibility. And the way to do that is to ship wins. There really isn't, you can talk till the end of time, but really where the credibility gets built is when you ship wins. So my overarching sort of recommendations, and we'll dig into each of these, is as you take ownership of a metric, you need to commit to diving deep into that metric. You need to come up with an idea portfolio, not just an idea or two ideas, an idea portfolio, and we'll talk about that. And you need to ship wins, and you need to experiment and keep improving. And these are not sequential. You're sort of doing all at the same time, but you need to do all of them. Certain things that we won't talk about too much is, some things need to be in place. All of this is well and good, but like you need to have some core infrastructure and processes built out for you to be effective, right? One, you need to trust your data. If it's a problem that requires quantitative analysis, right? If you don't, you need to build trust in your data before you can do a lot of things. You may still ship stuff that in the absence of data, which is fine, but like you want to get to a point where you start generating data about your core metrics. You need passionate and supportive teams. If there's a lot of dysfunction in your teams, hard to really move fast and move quickly and ship wins. And you also need risk tolerance with the exec team. It's a new metric, you're going to make mistakes. If people want to be incremental, either you set very incremental goals and you say, yeah, we're going to move this metric in this next year by 1%. That's fine. But then don't expect it to move by 10%. So you can't have 10% growth or 20% growth or 20% reduction in the case of cost of insurance and be like, we don't want you to make any mistakes. Not going to happen, right? This is my spiel. If your current job doesn't offer these things, we're hiring. All right, the first one, diving deep. We talked about becoming the most knowledgeable person in your company for the metric. How does that work? I think it means you have to collaborate with a lot of different teams. In our case, this was data science, data engineering, data analysis, ops, because a lot of the domain knowledge sat with ops in a lot of people's minds and in some documentation, but it was all sitting there. The executive team, we had to keep showing that we were making progress, and other PMs. all right, what do we do? So when we started diving deep, we started at the top. What are the financial metrics of the company? And you'll be surprised, a lot of people in the company weren't quite clear how we measure financial success, right? And a snapshot is really gross revenue, all the money that comes in, net revenue, the amount we keep once we've paid out hosts their share of the overall revenue, gross profit, and this is where cost of insurance sits. So really what we're trying to maximize is gross profit, and a lot of the stuff around CS and ops costs and all that sit there as well. So anyways, our goal really became gross profit. Then we were like, all right, what are the types of risk? And we had some inkling of this, but we didn't really have a good grasp. It's like, okay, there's two types. People, well-meaning people who, where bad stuff happens to them, accidents and so on, or people who have the intent to, for example, who have malicious intent and want to steal the car, or in most cases, they want to steal the car. And we were doing okay on fraud. We were actually fine on fraud. And so we're like, all right, and behavioral is sort of the bigger piece. So let's focus on behavioral. And then we dug even deeper. And then we started seeing, okay, there's, you guys, some of you have had car insurance. So you've got liability, you've got physical damage, where damage the car. What if the car damages something else? There's things called bad debt, where, for example, you crash the car costs 20,000. We need to charge you 20,000. You don't pay us. That 20,000 goes into bad debt, stuff that we had to collect from guests, but they didn't pay us. Incidentals are things where you went over the mileage limit, you left the car dirty, all that sort of stuff. And roadside is when we need to send roadside assistance out to get help to you. So there's a lot here. You don't have to. This is just to give you a sense of how we function. But yeah, it got more complex by the minute. All right, then we were like, where do we focus? And we were like, liability. The problem with liability is some of the claim processing takes like a year, right? There's a lot of parties involved. The city of San Francisco is involved. The muni is involved, and all that. And you're like, it takes a year sometimes to process it. So the delay is huge. Even though liability is the biggest piece, we said, all right, we're not going to be focusing on that. So we're like, let's focus on physical damage. That's the next big piece. Our process, and you're like, but I thought we were talking about experimentation. We're getting to the experimentation part, but one of the things is, for experimentation to work, your metrics need to be really, really solid. If you're trying to optimize for the wrong thing, you're going to get lost. So first of all, again, this was a young metric. So we started saying, how do we share responsibility? So we came up with an equation, and equations are actually a great way to divide responsibility as you think about your businesses, where you can say, these metrics are owned by this team and these metrics are owned by another team. And so we essentially came up with an equation, and we said the top of that stuff where claims rate is concerned, where how much severity happens, how much we pay per accident and all that is a product team. Claims processing and collections are all the claims team, which again makes sense. But it wasn't ideal, and that's the point. Whatever you come up with as you get on this journey will not be ideal, and that's okay. For example, today, as we move towards the current iteration, product also works on collections, right? That piece that was in the claims domain, product is also working on that. And the reason for that is we've come up with models to predict how much we might collect from someone if they got into an accident. So your first sort of foray doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be good enough for you to share responsibilities, divide and conquer, and move forward. And the hope is that over time you're sort of getting better at diving deeper and reconstructing the problem. All right, so a few things that help when you're doing your analysis of this metric. You need good, clean data, right? We talked about this. If it's non-existent, if a lot of it is done by ops agents, you need to have processes to collect the data. If you don't trust it, you need to find ways to clean that data and ensure your pipelines are making sense. Equations help. I think it's a good way early on to start, again, dividing out responsibility. And I think as you learn, that it's very gratifying to sit, headphones on, dig into data, and come up with all this stuff. But I think it's important to socialize all your learnings as well, because that's, the whole company is learning with you. And to get buy-in, you need to have socialized some of these learnings beforehand. And don't wait for the right talent to be hired. A lot of times we're like, I can't do this because I don't have those people. Till today, we don't have any insurance experts or appraisers at Turo, right? And so, just get started. And if you're focused and you have smart people working on a problem, typically you'll see progress. Just want to recap all the steps we went through. And as you can see, there were a lot of steps involved. So summary would be start with the top of start with the company's metrics and work your way downward, right? Because if you start somewhere in the middle, it's hard to sometimes tie it back to what the financial reason you're doing this for. And so it's important to do that because it's easier to get buy-in with execs and your finance team and so on. And if you do start at that level. We didn't talk about shipping wins that much, and we'll talk about it a bit more later. But I think even if you're putting blunt instruments in place, even if you're shipping things that are not the highest value things, it's important to keep shipping wins, and that's really how you get trust. And we talked about socializing learnings often. All right, so you've got some understanding of your metric, enough to get you moving forward. What do you do next? I really like this idea of thinking of PMs as investors of resources, right? Like you're really essentially asking engineers, designers, and others to spend a piece of time, a non-renewable asset, doing something that you're asking them to do. So you need to make a very strong case about why certain things need to be done. And your portfolio, you want to have a portfolio to de-risk your metric and the success for it. And your portfolio must balance reward and risk. You got to have some quick wins. You got to have some longer term things that are bets that may or may not pay off, right? Before you come up with your idea set, you want to come up with some guiding philosophies, I think, right? So you want to, in our case, that meant don't block people. So one way to stop risk is just block people. So if I know that you're going to cause an accident on the platform, and we have ways of predicting that reasonably well, we could just say, sorry, we don't want your business. And that's not ideal. That's not good because some people, you want to let as many people use your product as possible. And there are other ways of de-risking a trip. So don't block unless absolutely needed was one of our guiding philosophies, and still is to this day. We want to, in line with that, we want to target friction. So we want to, as much as possible, not have blunt instruments that we apply across the board. As much as possible, we want to get more and more targeted in the things we ask you to do to de-risk the trip. For example, we want to charge you a deposit. Let's not charge everyone with a debit card a deposit. That's one way to do it. We could start there. But we want to get to a point where we say we only, if you have a debit card and, I don't know, you're in certain geographies or you're booking a certain type of car that is more likely to get into an accident, then we're like, all right, let's charge your deposit, right? And, you have to keep an eye on what the industry is doing. You can't you're not operating in a vacuum, so you want to be competitive in your industry. All right, so ultimately we figured, and then the next thing is how do I figure out what my levers are? Because ideas you can come up with ideas in a vacuum, but really one way to think about ideation is what are the big levers, right? What can I do? For example, right now we're thinking about Turo compared to say an enterprise, right? Enterprise offers unlimited mileage on most of their cars. Turo doesn't. And so that's a big lever, and that's not a risk problem, but that's a conversion thing. How can we offer more unlimited mileage in our marketplace, right? That's a big lever. So in your problem set, I think it's important to think of the big levers that can have a step change impact and start there. For us, some of the levers are, if we determine you have a high probability of accident, we can block you. We mentioned that. And then another idea was, can we change your behavior? And actually, we can. Some science has proven that if you ask people to sign an honor code before they do certain things, they are less likely to act, they're more likely to be more careful. So, can we change behavior? Is there another way of thinking about this problem? What about our expected damage amount? Again, this comes from models, right? Can we suggest a cheaper car? A cheaper car, more likely to have less damage. What about if we know that you're a recovery risk? We could do things like ask you for your personal insurance, because then if you can charge your personal insurance, our risk goes away. Or we could charge deposits. So these are obviously going to be customized to your business, but I think it's important to think of the core levers that can really move your metrics. I'm going to skip this, but basically, like, you want to come up with some big bets and some medium bets, and you want to start shipping them in a mixed manner, right? And I think it's important to realize, I think a lot of PMs, especially junior PMs, get stuck on, what if this is not the best thing to be doing for this metric? And I think you need to live with the understanding that it's not. Because as you gain more understanding of a metric, you're going to come up with better solutions. And so by definition, you know less today than you do tomorrow, and when you know more, you're going to come up with better solutions. So you have to be okay and revel in that sort of knowledge that whatever you're doing today is imperfect. So for example, we started with like blocking using credit score, right? And then we moved towards a modeling-based approach. And what that did was we started seeing a lot of people with a low credit score who the model let in, and it was still better for our business. And then we said, okay, and we used to have one model, and now we've moved to 3 models. And so over time, we've become more and more complex, and we've become better. But like if we had started like working on the 3 models, it would have taken us like 8 months to like even get started, and you don't want that. All right, so come up with your philosophies, identify the levers, and create a mix of ideas. And again, keep shipping. All right, experiment and learn. A quick time check. Okay, here's some time. So for those not familiar with experiments, also you have to get to a certain size to really find value in experimentation, right? And so for people that haven't had the opportunity to experiment, these are typically the steps involved with experimentation. One, you're coming up with a hypothesis. So you've identified your levers. You're like, okay, if I tweak this lever this way, I think this will happen. You definitely don't want to just experiment without success metrics, because then how are you measuring success? So you come up with those. You also come up with counter metrics. If I do this, there's a risk that this also may go wrong. You design the experiment, which basically is a fancy way of saying you determine what population of people you want to run it on, what the execution looks like, are you going to show this versus not show this, or are you going to show price X versus price Y, all those sort of things. Execute, which involves, creating the data, the data science, machine learning model, potentially, the engineering effort, all of that, and running the experiment. And then you're collecting data, and hopefully you're reaching significance on your success metric, and also on your counter metric. And if you do, awesome. If you don't, things get a little bit more tricky, and we can talk about that. Another issue that is very specific to risk, but maybe applicable to some other things, and every test has some of this. I'm talking about risk, but every test sometimes has other challenges. To really have an impact on risk, you need to allow for accidents to happen, right? Like you need a holdout group, because that's the only way you can train your models to get better at predicting accidents. So you have to you have to leave a holdout group and say, yeah, we know accidents are going to happen, but we'll accept the risk. So that's one challenge. And if you don't have that, you can't train your models effectively. Another challenge with claims is the books take a very long time to close. Claim processing could take a few weeks. So it's at least 45 to 60 days until we have solid numbers on our accident data, severity, and all that sort of stuff. One accident in a Maserati completely screws your numbers, and it's just how it works. You got to live with that uncertainty. And so you come up with these proxy metrics that are not really your gross profit, but you come up with things like claims rate, severity, recovery rate, and all that, and that's how you sort of predict success. And the biggest unfortunate thing with risk is your counter metrics is growth, is money. Because you're essentially, if you block people or you show them a deposit, you're losing them. So your counter metrics end up being conversion and revenue. All right. We'll talk about 3 tests and go through them quickly. Our first one was, I mentioned we used to block based on credit score, and we moved towards a machine learning model, and I'll talk about how we did that. And because going from a rule-based approach to a model-based approach is actually quite common, so I think it can be useful. And the second one was targeted deposits, and the third one was adding a new protection plan. All right, so this is sort of the test details that I outlined earlier. We had a hypothesis that a machine learning model can do better than a rule-based approach, a credit score-based approach on determining risk. We said, all right, our success metric is gross profit, but it's hard to get to. We're going to use the proxy metrics. And our counter metric, as I said, was conversion, right? So our first setup, and one thing to note, we didn't have a holdout group before this. So we hadn't trained the model on a holdout group. What we had trained the model on was, of the people that got through our funnel, even after the credit risk check, how many of them got into accidents? So we really didn't have a sense of the risk for people that got blocked by the credit risk, right? Or by the credit score. And so we had, but we took another bet. We said, what if this model is not trained on that data, but we still see how it performs in the wild? So that was a bet. So you got to get buy-in. There's a whole lot of things around that. You got to make the pitch. You got to ensure people are okay with it. And I saw a few people from Split. We actually use Split for a lot of this work. So thanks, guys. So we first started with the control, which was the credit score. We then stacked our machine learning model on top of it. So we were stopping even more people than the machine learning model was stopping. And that was really what the model was trained on. And then we took the bet and trained, and then we ran 20% of our people through the machine learning model alone. The machine learning model performed really well, better than group 2, and we were like, all right, let's get rid of group 2. And so we then moved to a 50-50 on control and the machine learning model alone. And ultimately, we ended up enshrining it because it performed really, really well. We, after that, made a case to have a holdout group, and I think this is where the credibility of shipping early and often and getting wins, feeding back into your ability to take bigger bets in the future comes in. We were able to convince them that a holdout group is important, and that's the only way we'd be able to come up with better and better models in the future. I'm going to skip mistakes for this one, since we're running out of time a little bit. So the second thing was deposits. Yeah.
What's the holdout group?
Good question. Holdout is basically a general term for when you skip doing certain things that you're doing on the control or the test group, right? So let's say in our case there was people come in, try to book a car. We try to either score them on a credit score level or using the machine learning model, right? A holdout would be a third thing where we skip doing this altogether and just let the trip go through, right? And that's the only way you can really get a feel for the risk of the entire marketplace, because you've not blocked anyone, so there's no selection issues. Does that answer your question? Good. All right, deposits. So the deposit structure hypothesis was deposits will improve collections and also improve driving behavior. So deposits, there's a lot of research out there to show loss aversion is a big thing with deposits. Whenever people charge deposits, you tend to, again, behave better because you have money on the line, right? So we were like, okay, let's test this. Success metrics were really, one issue with deposits was we were like, okay, deposits seems like a good idea, but we have no idea how many people are going to drop off if we, charge a deposit to them. And we ultimately want to get to a model that, gives us a deposit for a person, but has factored in how much the showing of the deposit would affect their conversion. So there were 2 different tests we had to do. So we first started with if we show a deposit to a randomized population, how does that affect conversion for each segment of that population? And that's what we did. It was really annoying for hosts. Hosts are like, why are my people starting to see, guests starting to see deposits? So we had to apologize a little bit to our hosts. But we did it, and we had to manage for host annoyance, and we had to decide what amounts we wanted to run in this conversion test. So we got that data, and then our data science team went to work and said, okay, now I'm going to work on a model that will spit out a number for each person who tries to book and say this is the deposit we should charge this person, accounting for the fact that this is how much conversion loss might happen for that person. And so we started with the control where nobody saw any deposits, and then the targeted deposits on 50% of our population, and of the total, about 20% were seeing a deposit. And we saw in practice that loss aversion works. The benefits of a deposit were lesser so on collecting money from that deposit and much more so on the probability of having an accident in the first place. So that was very interesting, and it proved out the research. Yeah.
Can you explain that again?
Sure. Essentially, there's three things that lead to losses. One, how likely are you to get into an accident? Two, if you get into an accident, what's the expected loss going to be? And third, given the expected loss, how much do we expect to recover from you, right? So the product of those three things ends up being like our net losses. Intuitively, if you know nothing about deposits, you'd say, okay, deposits obviously help with recovery, right? The third one, because you have a deposit, somebody gets in an accident, you already have those $200, $300 that you have collected from them. But accidents have a high severity rate. Accidents have severity rates above $1,500, $2,000. So that $200, $300 is something, but it's a dent, right? What ended up being the case was charging a deposit to someone was much more likely to have a bigger effect on their probability of getting into an accident in the first place. And that's simply because of the psychology of loss aversion and the fact that you have money on the line, so you end up driving better, not giving your irresponsible friend the car, and all that sort of stuff. So that's where we got most of our gains from. For sake of time, I'm going to skip this. Actually, maybe you have just one more slide, so it's fine. So I want to talk about a thing that a lot of people debated we should test, and we ended up not testing. And I think that's also an important thing that happens when you're doing product is not everything needs to be tested, even if you can test everything. So in this case, we wanted to launch a zero deductible plan. Just to give you some context, as a guest, when you come to book, you can choose from a list of protection plans, and each of them really is different in two major ways. One, if you get into an accident, how much out-of-pocket maximum costs you need to pay, right? So the cheaper plans, you have a higher deductible, which means Turo doesn't you're liable for more money. But if you pay us more upfront, you're liable for less money if you do get into an accident. We didn't have a zero deductible plan, which is basically a walk-away plan, right? Like you choose this plan, you pay a little bit extra, and then if an accident happens, you're liable for $0. So some people were like, oh, this is too risky. And they were like, oh, we should test, adding this plan. So we should allow certain, 50% of our marketplace to add this plan if they want, and 50% we shouldn't let them add this plan. And we went back and forth, but the net was, is there a world where we don't want this plan? And the answer was no. So then testing it is sort of like, I'm simplifying it a little bit, but ultimately we wanted to, we were going to have this plan. So really, there was nothing that would change if we did test it, right? And so we decided, let's not test it. We picked a price. They're like, we picked a price for the plan, kind of out of judgment and based on competitive pressures. And when we launched it, we realized that the plan wasn't doing so well on gross profit. And we're like, okay. So we realign, and we are going to start charging a little bit more for that plan. So there are ways of reorienting and realigning and shipping incrementally, even when you don't test. And if testing is not really going to change what you're going to do, there's no really point. There's no point of testing, right? The whole point of experimentation is it informs decisions. If it's not changing your decisions, don't test. How do we end up doing? Quite well, actually. So we had a slow start to 2017, and one part of that was it was taking us quite a few weeks to test our modeling, and because of that, we weren't seeing the gains, right? Because we had 3 groups, and it was taking a very long time to see the gains, and so we got a bit of a slow start. But once we hit our stride, we really figure it out. So that's another learning is like you don't want to get disheartened too early. Young metrics take more time to get better at as a company, and that's okay. But we still have a long way to go. The y-axis is our cost of insurance. Yeah, sorry, I should explain that. And that's year over year by quarter. But we have more things to do and more problems to solve. As we move towards becoming a profitable company, this is going to be one of our biggest challenges, and there's more work left. Anyways, thank you so much for listening, and I want to see if you have questions.
I have a two-part question.
Sure.
The first one is that in regard to the product management role at your company,
Yeah.
it sounds like it's more of a business role and not as much focused on like technical roadmaps. Is that the case?
So when you say business focus and not technical roadmaps, what do you mean by technical roadmaps?
So let's say I'm an iPhone PM.
Yeah.
I'll focus on like 1 or 2 years out what particular technical features in the phone.
Yeah.
And so I would need more of a technology background. But
Yeah.
at your firm, is it more of a business background for the PM competency?
I'd say that's fair. Yes, I mean I think Turo and most marketplaces are the biggest challenges are not technology related. They are product related. They are just the quality of the marketplace related. Ensuring that every time somebody wants a car, they get a car. They're having a great experience. So it's very consumer driven. Cost of insurance is a bit tricky, and this one, I haven't really talked a lot about users here, and that's sort of on purpose. I was debating whether to talk about like some of the guest features that were more applicable and a lot of people talk about, or cost of insurance, which is very sort of business and finance focused. And I did this because it's unique, but we also have a lot of challenges where we're extremely user focused and driven by customer feedback. But yes, we don't really build a lot of things for technologies that are coming out like AR or VR. That's not a big driving factor for us. Yeah.
For the users, did you go through a beta tester cycle? Did you use the same framework for users as you did for the insurance problem, the levers and so on, or was it different?
So the interesting thing with risk especially, and I'll talk about other stuff that we do in the guest side at Turo, but it's not guest friendly, right? Like nobody likes having a deposit. Nobody likes being blocked. So unfortunately, this is one of those things that is hard as an empathetic product manager to like do something that's not in the guest's best interest, so to speak, but really is important if you want to survive as a company and thrive and ensure a lot of guests have a great experience, right? On the things that we do on the standard e-commerce side of the business, we do a lot of user testing. We especially for initiatives that are atypical, and we have a lot of those because car sharing is different. We do a lot of testing, and recently, for example, we wanted to see what the experience would be mid-trip. Like, what are people expecting mid-trip in terms of like help if they get into an accident, if their car gets towed over and so on. So we do a lot of testing on that side of the business, lesser so on the insurance side of the product.
How often do you try a new experiment?
Quite often. I think at any given point in time.
Can you repeat the question, sir?
Oh, sorry. The question is, how often do we run experiments? Quite often. I think as a company, we, at any given point in time, at least have 5 to 10 experiments running. And that's actually not that much. I wish we were experimenting even more, but that's what we do today.
Per week?
Like at any given point in time, you'd have 5 to 10 running. I mean, I think insurance is different. You'll have lesser in this domain because every experiment takes a very long time because it's so far down in the funnel. But yeah, we try to test quite a bit. Yeah.
Can you show us some example? How do you do the experiment? Do you do A/B testing your platform, or how do you do it?
Got it. So as I said, so the general pipeline, Split's getting another call out. We use Split for bucketing our users, and it's a pretty good tool to do that. Based on that, we show different, the test group sees something, the control sees something else. So we have to build those two versions out in our products. Sometimes it's just backend based, right? So the backend controls control and test, and Split says bucket this person accordingly, and the backend basically decides what to show. Or sometimes a client has to decide what to show, and so so Split through the backend is sending the bucketing to the client, and the client then shows whatever treatment or control that they need to show for that user.
How many users you have in the platform to able to do this A/B testing?
We have millions of signups, so I mean, yeah, so that helps. There's definitely helpful to have a lot of scale, and I think the last piece is we have a homegrown visualization tool for the viewing of the experiment data. So from all of that, the data is generated to a warehouse, and we have a visualization tool on top of that. Yeah.
Looks like, thanks for emphasizing on the impact of experiments and how important they are. I had a question around how do you control the impact of the environment on the experiments run over time? So to compare the value results of two experiments, they are not apples to apples. In winters during snow there are more accidents than during summer.
Yeah.
You cannot compare the values.
I mean, that's why we try to experiment, because at least you're testing like against like. But you're right, there could be an impact. So for us, seasonality is definitely a thing. But another thing is also, just as I mentioned, 1 or 2 major losses can completely tilt the results, because again, a car could be $100,000 car and it's like, oh crap, that completely changed the results. So we A/B test. There is a seasonal component, but at least we ensure that in that season we're comparing like to like, and if we start seeing, once we enshrine, if you start seeing the data not matching up to the test, we take actions accordingly. Yeah.
Just a quick question on the topic of damages. In your particular market car,
Yeah.
was it fairly easy to assess what the original condition of the car is, so that, let's say, if a host reports like a small dent, you're able to actually assess, oh, this was there before or not there before?
That's a good question. So we have a rule and a policy in the marketplace that says the host needs to take pre-trip pictures for them to be paid out at the end for a claim, right? So before the trip starts, they have, I think it's 24 hours to take pictures of the car's condition, and then we use, if you haven't taken those, even if it's a legitimate claim, we don't entertain it. So the reason for that is, we want to know the condition of the car right when the trip started.
The host takes the pictures, not the guest?
The host takes the pictures.
Doesn't that leave room for fraud?
No, we just
I mean, the guest can see the host pictures. So
I took Turo and I took the pictures as a guest.
yes, so the guest also can take pictures, but we mandate the host to take it if they want to get. Yes. But the guest can also take pictures, and the guest can also see what the host has taken. So there's transparency.
And at the end of the trip as well?
You're not required to at the end of the trip. If you aren't filing a claim, you don't need to take pictures. We ask hosts to do it, but the incentive is a lot less than at the start of the trip.
We got to move on.
Sure.
Maybe one last quick question. Anybody?
Yeah.
If you run 5 to 10 experiments at the same time,
Yeah.
how you make sure that this experiment is the one who led to this success, or there is interference?
You may want to talk to the Split guys. They do a good job of you can basically say, if someone's in this test group, they're not going to be part of your test, right? And so you can bucket in a way that makes sense and avoid collision. A lot of times you don't have to do that, because a lot of times yes, there might be collisions, but you make a judgment call that they're light enough that you don't actually care. But sometimes when it's very clear that there's going to be a collision and you won't be able to tell what caused the impact, you basically segment users into different buckets and ensure that they don't mix. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the tools do that, the statistical methods for isolating variables as well, and I'm sure that's what Split is doing behind the scenes stuff. Cool. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Cool. Thank you. Awesome. So our next speaker is Anjali. So she's going to talk about building a strong product culture. Anjali is a product and business executive with experience growing businesses from 0 to 100 million, like Google mobile ads, 100 million to $1 billion like Yahoo Gemini, and $1 billion to X billion like Yahoo Gemini. She's an award-winning team leader and semi-regular public speaker on product management and product culture. And with that, I'll hand it over to Anjali.
Yeah? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Hey guys, my name is Anjali. I'm a senior director at AdRoll. We do retargeting ads, prospecting ads, and email. That is our logo. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about building a strong product culture, how to develop the traits in yourself that make a strong PM, look for those traits when you're recruiting and hiring your team, and generally think about how to grow your skill set and your team's skill set as a product manager. I have been managing PMs now for 5 years, and so I have kind of a growing thesis on what makes a good chemistry on a product management team and a good candidates, what kind of skills they demonstrate. So that will be the focus of this talk. Who am I? So I started my career at Google, where we didn't just wear ridiculous clothes, we actually did some good stuff. I worked on mobile advertising. I was not a product manager in the beginning, I was an account manager. I sat in a sales org. I had a quota, a mobile revenue number that I had to hit, and I'll talk a little bit about how I navigated from being a mobile account manager to a product manager. But I sat on a sales team, I talked to customers, big technology, telco customers actually, Comcast, Verizon, and Sprint, and we were intended to sell those folks mobile ads. And that's how I started my career. I then moved to Yahoo. That's my Yahoo purple shirt, and I got a dog. His name is Bullet. Yahoo was building also a mobile business. This was around the time that Marissa Mayer left Google, joined Yahoo, and really wanted to create a stronger product culture at the company and a stronger mobile-first mentality at the company. Everything you design should be a mobile application first, mobile UI experiences, etc. So when Marissa was poaching / encouraging Googlers to join her, they were looking for mobile expertise, and so I followed them over to to Yahoo. And most recently, now it's been 3 years, I'm at AdRoll. We're in the mission, and I work on advertising there as well. So always in the advertising marketing area. I wanted to start with just saying, talking a little bit about being from in a sales culture and then moving into product. My path to product was a little bit unconventional. When I first started to realize I wanted to be a PM, it was because I started building sales tools that would enable my sales force to sell better, but they were producty in nature. So what I mean by that is I built this dashboard in Excel. It was called Sharpshooter, and it basically was a way of ranking accounts by their mobile readiness. So I was trying to sell mobile advertising, right? And I was working with a bunch of sales teams who had clients, big and small. And Sharpshooter was a giant Excel model which looked at things like, do they have a mobile landing page? Do they have a customer service phone number that could be used for click-to-call ads? Do they have an app? Do they have a responsive UI design even on their desktop so that an app would be easy to create? All of this went into this giant Excel model, which I then used to prioritize accounts for the sellers that they could sell mobile to. Clint Eastwood, Sharpshooter, I called it because it was enabled you to pick the accounts that were most mobile ready and most mobile friendly. So that's when I started thinking, like, wait a minute, I'm an account manager, I'm supposed to focus on a couple of accounts, but I actually like building these tools. And this wasn't computer science, guys, this was Excel. I was using Excel formulas to rank and prioritize all these indexes to kind of surface which were the highest priority mobile ready accounts. The next thing I built was also a tool, forgive the corny name, around this time that like very idiotic book, 50 Shades of Grey, was in market. I do not recommend you read it, although I am not ashamed to admit I did read it. I also saw the movie, which is also a terrible thing to admit, but I stopped after book 1. In any case, at that time, we were trying to figure out how a customer should set their bid multiplier on their AdWord campaigns, potentially by region. So there are 50 states in the United States, but I picked the 48 contiguous states, and I built kind of a very rudimentary model around if you have a certain share of voice on a certain set of keywords, you should be, if that share of voice is too low, you should up your bid. If that share of voice is too high, you should lower your bid. And I put a little heat map behind it. Again, this is not code. This is in Excel, but I sent it to my sales teams and they loved it. It enabled them to figure out how to modify their AdWords bids by geography. It enabled them to get their campaigns spending more money, and it enabled them to do at scale what would have taken quite a bit of time. And that's the key word I realized in my journey was scale. Why was I building no one had asked me to do either Sharpshooter or 48 Shades of Grey. Why was I building these tools? Because some part of me hungered for doing more than just making a set of customers happy. I wanted to, in a scalable way, make lots of people happy at once. At that point, I didn't necessarily know I wanted to be in product, but I kind of took note of that about my character, which is that like I wanted to scalably reproduce a lot of things in an elegant way. I ended up being in product, and as a recruiter of product managers and as a team builder, I look for folks, and this is a little biased, I guess, but I look for folks with diverse paths like mine who didn't necessarily start out in product and engineering, but rather worked in functions that would enable them to see the whole picture of the business side, the sales side, the marketing side, the PR side. I've hired folks who've come from quote unquote the fuzzy areas of the company, but that's not a disparaging term. It just means that they're not technical by expertise, but their expertise could be something very different. So what I'm going to go into now is building that great product culture and what I realized about myself and how that has informed how I hire and grow PMs. Okay, so the way I did this deck is I set it to songs. I won't play the songs, but the songs are reminiscent of the lesson learned. I'm a big music fan. I don't know if you guys are music fans or fans of the Police, but I am. So I included that in this deck, and I wanted to kind of convey what I learned about hiring great PMs and being a good PM. So there's this song by the Police called Every Breath You Take, which is, people think it's a love song, but it's actually quite a sinister, scary song because he's stalking this person and saying like every single day, every word you say, I'll be watching you. It's actually not a love song. It is like the recipe for some sort of murder mystery or something like that. But the reason why I include it in this deck is because focus on the customer. Okay, everybody says focus on the customer. We say this over and over again. But the great PMs I have worked with stalk the customer, almost to the point of the police and saying that everything you do, I want to watch you. When I recruit, let me take a step back, right? AdRoll serves, in my current capacity, we serve what is called direct-to-consumer brands. So think of it as like Warby Parker, Bonobos, Casper mattresses. To be an effective PM, I want my PMs and myself to be out of the office, in the customer's head, thinking like they think, more than we are thinking like AdRoll thinks. And I'll give you an example. Casper mattresses was one of our early customers. They're not just thinking about cost of media, and if we optimized our whole product around their cost of media, that would be somewhat short-sighted. Casper mattresses is thinking about shipping costs, packaging costs, cost to return. They made some bold moves in having free shipping on their mattresses and compressing their mattress into a box the size of a dorm refrigerator. That mentality, understanding what the customer really cares about, the overall cost of serving their customers, has to inform the PM at AdRoll who is responsible for building media products for a customer like Casper mattresses. And that only happens when you get out of the building, and I say this a lot, there are no answers within the four walls of your building. Get out of the building and talk to customers. So what that means is when I recruit, I listen really heavily for stories where the candidate can tell me what is a real insight about the customer that informed the product roadmap. Because I'll tell you, I'll talk about stakeholder management. Product ideas are going to come from everywhere. They're going to come from your CEO, your CFO, your teammates, your boss. But the best product ideas are ones that you sit in with a customer, you feel a pain point acutely, and you start to design your product around that. And that only happens when you get out of your building and you stalk the customer. And as we get busier, like I'm sure all of us open Google Calendar every morning and we have wall-to-wall meetings, and you can often self-rationalize, there's no time to figure out where my customers are or go sit with them. It is very easy to become myopic and to let the wrong type of folks design your roadmap if you don't get out and talk to your customers. So stalk your customers. That's my lesson number one. I look for candidates who've done it, and I try to get my PMs to do it, and I increasingly set OKRs for myself, 4 or 5 customer conversations per quarter. Okay, next song. Truth-seeking behavior. This is Good Charlotte. Not many people know this song, but basically the lyrics of this song is, I want the truth, give me the truth, I want the truth. This kind of also dovetails with seeking out the customer. So a customer, when you talk to a customer, and this is why I often think that having a good empathy psychology background can be as important as a PM as a technical background, they will tell you they will start talking in a language that is, my cost of media is too high or my CPMs are too high, but you have to really dig deep to understand the root cause of the pain that they are suffering, right? And so the one of the example I'll give is, I'll give the example of we have a lady in AdRoll's business she's selling makeup. And there is a lot of intricacies around how to sell makeup and the regulation around how to have healthy makeup and not include chemicals that are disruptive. And so she will start a conversation with Kayla. She works at Head Candy. She sells makeups and headgear, hair accessories. And she'll talk about things like, AdRoll, the media I bought with you guys was too high, but if you dig deeper, there's a lot more pain in her daily business than you realize by just skimming the surface. And that may not directly inform your roadmap, but it informs your ability to get inside the customer's head and really figure out what it is Kayla's trying to solve for. She believes she has some of the best makeup palettes on the market, but she knows that she has to comply with a bunch of regulations. In shipping her makeup palettes, often it can get dislodged, so the customer opens the box and then the whole thing looks like a mess. That has informed the product roadmap in subtle ways in terms of how we start to offer media and marketing products for businesses like Kayla's to grow their business. So all of this is to say, it's not enough to just check the box, I talked to a customer. You have to really be like an investigative reporter and ask 5 whys. Why do you buy this way? Why are you struggling with this pain point? Why? To really get at the root cause of some of the issues. So Govind talked a lot about metrics, and I'm going to steal some of his thunder. It is also important to set a North Star. There's a song by U2. It's called North Star, and it's important to set the right North Star. And so by that I mean it's very easy in the ad world. I come from the ad world to look at kind of vanity metrics like CPC, CPM. One of the things I'm really pushing my team to do is, okay, if we're selling to small businesses, like Casper Mattresses 5-6 years ago, like Kayla's business, what is it they actually want to optimize for? They don't want to optimize for CPC and CPM of ads. They want to optimize for sales. They want to grow. Moreover, they want to optimize for profitable sales. They want to optimize for more customers, but not just more customers, high lifetime value customers. They want to optimize for reducing churn. And so if you build a media and marketing product with the customer at your center and the customer's North Star at your center, you can actually, I think, do a much better job at delivering real value. CPMs and CPCs are in some ways a vanity metric, and what you really want to be doing is figuring out what is the right marketing product for Kayla's business so that she can generate repeat loyal customers to her business. And again, that North Star requires deeply understanding what problem you're solving for. Okay, the other capability that I look for, try to harness myself, is execution abilities. So there's this Eminem song, it was very popular, 2002 era, Lose Yourself. There's a concept called flow, and losing yourself means you just get so immersed in the work you're doing as a product manager, whether it's writing JIRA tickets or moving things through a backlog, you want to see the product come to fruition. And that is not necessarily something that is, you have to just really love the day-to-day grind of product management and the day-to-day capabilities the day-to-day wins that you can surface by getting into the rhythm of product management. So I look for people who have executed small wins, as Govind said, both small wins and big wins over the course of their career to grow the products under their purview. And part of that comes from just really enjoying the day-to-day work of being a PM, being able to lose yourself in conversations with engineers, in triaging issues, in writing good tickets, in talking to your sales counterparts about their feedback on the product. A lot of that is just, do you enjoy? I look for folks who demonstrate that they enjoy the day-to-day work and the day-to-day iterative ability of shipping wins. And finally, stakeholder management. So there's this song called Come Together by the Beatles. And the song, everybody knows the lyrics, but this is one of the biggest things I've learned about being a product manager, and also something I look to hire for. You are, for better or worse, P0, the expert on your product. But there are a lot of hopes and expectations heaped upon you by stakeholders everywhere. Your CFO wants the product to make money fast. Your CTO wants the product to use the very latest and greatest tech and win awards based upon the technical capabilities of your product. Your chief product officer wants you to always ship fast. That's what every CPO says. Your sales officer, your chief revenue officer, not surprisingly, wants you to make a product that makes money. And so on and so forth, right? There is an art. What I've found is that there is a tremendous art to managing these different stakeholder concerns and speaking about your product in a language that your stakeholders can really understand. So if I'm talking to my CFO or my CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, I'll often put a financial model in front of them to show, look, even if the product is freemium in the first version, I think we'll get to a paid version by month 3 or iteration 3, and this is when the revenue curve will start to move up and to the right. And often if you paint that longer term picture in a language that they understand, they are immediately put at ease. And similarly, when you're talking to your CTO or your CPO, the win is when all of these people think that you are speaking their language, and even if they hate each other, they all love you because your pitch to them has been your product is going to solve for their acute needs. And believe me, I've been at companies where the executive team is, I shall not name names, but the executive team is largely dysfunctional and does hate each other, but they all love me because basically what I've done is I've spoken to them about my product in the language that they care about. And it's not dishonest, right? There are some products that are more technical than others. There are some products that are more revenue generating than others. But if you're honest and you frame your decks and you frame your conversations that way, it builds trust. And it makes people feel like they're part of your team. I often coach my PMs to assemble their own board of directors at the company. And by that I mean people at the company, stakeholders at the company who can help them think through their products, but also advocate for their products. And when they need more engineering resources, those people will be in the room advocating. When they need another product marketer hired to make their product a success, that board of directors will be in the room advocating for the PM, which is candidly golden, right? It enables you to build trust, build relationships, and get things done in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you didn't have a stakeholder board at your disposal. And it doesn't have to be only execs, right? You want a couple of key account managers to be on your board of directors to gut check you when you're about to bring a product to market. You may want some of your engineers, of course, but not only your direct engineers, but cross-functional engineers to vouch for the product, especially if you're going to poach engineers from different teams to grow your product over time. So this is what I mean by stakeholder management. And I think I actually have a short deck. This is my last slide. The last point I have learned as a PM, I've gleaned as a PM, and when I hire PMs is just this quote, a good product is never done, smart PMs everywhere. So a lot of times what I see happen at many of my companies is the launch signifies this gigantic celebration and relief, and we don't go back and figure out what were things we could have done better, what's the post-mortem on a product that didn't do well, what what's the post-mortem analysis on a product that did do well? And how do we continually make the product more effective over time? Part of that takes institutional buy-in, that we're investing in this space for the long term. And part of that is the PM building a steady drumbeat of feature releases, going back and learning from mistakes as well as successes, and continuing to steer the product to success over and over again. A good product is never done, as I like to say. And I think, yeah, that's it. Short talk. Questions, concerns? Yes?
Yes, can you elaborate on how did you help your customer of the mattress and the makeup, for example? After you know their pain, how do you translate in media?
Yes. Okay. So I work for a marketing company. We do ads. We see the website conversion. It's the sale, right? But we figured out that the fully loaded cost of acquiring a customer for the Casper mattress is more than just the marketing cost. It's shipping, it's packaging, it's returns, it's all that stuff, right? So we are now building a product that will actually take all those data points from Casper mattress and then aggregate it into what we're going to call like a cost per completed sale, something like that, that we can optimize our ad engine for, and we can also display beautifully in reporting. So basically, we're gonna optimize our engine to the metric that really matters to Casper, which is the fully loaded cost of selling a mattress to an end customer, which is much harder, right? Because we don't have purview into their point of sale data necessarily, their records of returns and transactions, but they're going to send us some raw data that we can play around with to begin with, and then if we can make this work, we're going to actually build a product. It's called a CDP, a customer data platform, if you guys are familiar with MarTech. But even if you're not familiar with marketing tech, I can describe it. It is a system that can take sales data, return data, a bunch of data, and turn it into a metric that our machines can optimize towards. So all of that is to say, the ads they run with AdRoll will be optimized towards driving profitable sales for them, where profitable sales accounts for more than just the cost of media. Does that make sense? Anything else? Questions? Yes?
What was the biggest, you talked a lot about transitioning from being an account manager into being a product manager, which a lot of times is a good thing, because you customers, things like that. What were some of the challenges that you faced?
Working with engineers is a different skill set, right? Because sometimes you're very abstract as a salesperson. You sell a dream. But when you work with engineers, they have no tolerance for that, nor should they. They need a roadmap. They need a list of deliverables to check off, right? And so you have to get fluent enough to just speak technical enough to them that shows you understand how the systems work, and that you can give them a logical sequence of operations that gets us to MVP, to alpha. I don't believe you have to be a product manager, but I do believe you have to be technically curious about how technical infrastructure works. So when I moved into product management, I have in my network, I'm sure you guys do as well, technical people to explain stuff to me. I didn't know what a RESTful API was. I didn't know all these terms, right? You can Wikipedia stuff, but I also learned that I learn best from humans. So I made my college friends, my family members sit down and explain to me what this stuff meant. You have a grace period at the beginning to be clueless. And I took advantage of that grace period and made people teach me stuff. And the other thing I learned about working with engineers is they will respect the hell out of you if you have a strong voice for the customer. So you can get away with sometimes not being the most technically savvy, but if you have conviction in what you're building, and for me conviction comes from customers, that also helps. But I would say that talking to customers and talking to engineers is a very different skill set. And engineers can also get kind of like pissed off, right, if you lead them astray. So I had to kind of figure that out. Yes?
So you mentioned that one thing that you really like to do is to sort of dig really deep with the customer and really analyze their key pain points and maybe uncover new ones. But those kind of really in-depth conversations take time, you know. So you can't do them with all your customers. You can only
Yes.
probably do them with a very select few. So how do you take what you're getting from just a few customers and make something that's going to work like for your product as a whole?
It's a really good question. It's a bit of art, it's a bit of science. I try to get somewhat of a representative sample, like AdRoll, for example, sells to retailers, some insurance companies, some education companies, so I'll try to get a one customer or a few customers from each of those. I read a lot of industry news as well, so if you can't get out and talk to customers, spend time Googling. Again, my customer set today is the direct-to-consumer brand, the Harry's shaving kits and the Casper mattresses I use all the time. So I tend to read a lot. Their CEOs will do interviews, etc. It's hard. It's hard to do. Yes, it is incredibly time consuming, but as best you can, take a lot of notes and you'll start to see patterns emerge, I think, sooner than you expect. And it's worth the front loading the time then, because before you spend precious dev cycles building stuff, you better have conviction you're building the right thing. Yes?
Yeah, I love this presentation, and it's like really memorable and easy to remember. So I'm curious, like, as as you go in your PM career and kind of like develop and grow, and like we're all intrinsically very driven to like advance in our career. And I think the roles of PM is so diverse, right? Like, what's your recommendation on like how, if we want to grow in our career, like how should prioritize the areas or skill sets that we would focus to be at one point, like, to move up in a career ladder?
Yeah, so there's one body of thought that's like lean into your strengths, right? So so there are PMs who are great storytellers. You put them in front of an audience and they can sell the vision. But they're a little bit weaker on the product instinct side. I actually, early in my career, and even today, I get that feedback that like you're really good at people management, you're really good at storytelling, but you need to get better at putting together a bigger product strategy, that kind of thing. So, what Govind quoted, Silicon Valley product blog, Marty Kagan, I read that blog all the time, and he has like a ton of skills that PMs have to have. And so I guess I'm not in the lean into your strengths camp. Early in your career, which I think most folks in this room, I think generally are earlier in their career, I'm in the camp of get a lot of feedback from your manager. Feedback is a gift, to use a cliche. Get a lot of feedback from your manager, from people around you on what are you good at and what are you bad at, candidly. And the stuff that you're bad at, seek training, seek coaching, but also watch people in the organization and watch what they do when it comes to those things. And it'll round out your skill set. You don't have to be all things to all people. You'll still have areas where you grow, but all this stuff I learned by watching people, honestly, and not just people senior to me. See people junior to me, people lateral to me. There's a guy in my office who's just brilliant at stakeholder management. Every deck is just tailored to the audience perfectly, and I just copy paste. I just steal from people. I watch people who are great, and I try to make it authentic to me. Yes.
I really like that you spoke about how not to just focus on one particular metric like CPC and then focus holistically on what drives the profit for customers. So can you give us an example of one such thing that you did by looking holistically at all the customer metrics and that actually converted into a product?
Yeah, totally. That's a good question. So, I was launching click-to-call ads at Google. Click-to-call ads are an ad unit where you could call and deliver, you can talk to a human being. That was a launch. The way that we had pitched the product was that you're able to capture more mobile sales as a result, because especially if you're selling stuff online and you need to talk, if you're talking through sizing before you buy something online, a call can be valuable. But what we also realized was calls are expensive for businesses, right? To have a human at the other end of the line is actually expensive. So while they were buying click-to-call ads from us, they actually wanted to know how they could minimize and streamline when they staff their call centers, not to incur tons of costs. So this isn't the perfect answer to your question, but one thing I realized by digging deeply is that call centers are expensive to operate. Having humans answer phones is an expensive proposition. And if I could surface in my reporting for click-to-call ads, the times of day, days of weeks, periods in which call volume was spiking, I could actually help my customers, and mind you, these were big customers, right? These were like the Comcasts of the world. I could help my customers figure out when to upstaff and destaff their call centers, and thereby save them some costs. So the ad unit became like a business management tool, or at least the analytics behind the ad unit became like a way to manage a more efficient operation. And I would have never gotten that idea had I not gone and just talked to them about, like, I went and visited some of their call centers, and I talked to some of their marketing folks, and it was apparent to me that the product could do more than just generate calls for them. The product could allow them to smartly structure their call center overall. So I try to step in early if I see that happening and figure out why. Is it that the PM has lost her spirit? Is it that the PM is unsure about the company's goals and needs some clarity on how her work fits into it? Momentum should be, that should be status quo. It should be a drumbeat, right? You should be launch often is the cliche. You should be launching early and often. If not, something is gonna miss. And that's when I try to step in and figure out why. Okay, well, thank you guys.